Tim Cole and I agree on two things. One, we have a great purposelessness in our society. And two, there's a great lack of authenticity as well. And Tim explains how these things are just the things that human beings like yourself and your team are craving. We need these things. There's scary statistics on disengagement in the workplace. And the question I have is that true for you or is that true for your team? Maybe you're disengaged, but you're just not facing it, or you can see it in your team, but you're not addressing it. You can change it for both you and for your team. The world needs the real you, not just some fabricated version. So how can you find who you are authentically and figure out your leadership style and approach? And really, the other question is related to purposelessness. Are you addressing purpose and having those discussions in the workplace or not? Tim tells us why we need to do that and how we should do that. And near the end, he shares a simple philosophy on just how to live your life, and you don't want to miss that. Hello and welcome to Purpose Matrix. I am very excited for today's guest, Mr. Tim Cole. Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm great.
Well, Tim, thanks so much for coming on. You know, Tim's going to bring a lot of leadership experience, business experience to the table today. He has more than 3 decades of experience in corporate leadership roles, senior executive roles in corporate leadership. But more recently, though, Tim is the founder and CEO of the Compass Alliance, an organization that is really helping develop leadership, but also the author of the book, The Compass Solution, which we'll talk about more in our discussion today. So we'll come to those things a little bit more, Tim. But before we do, kind of a high-level backstory. Your career, long career, a lot of success, but give us the backstory and some of the big shifts and moves that you made throughout your career.
Well, I think my story, like a lot of people's, is kind of an interesting one because I would never have guessed years ago when I was walking off a college campus that I would end up in industry. And I never would have guessed that I'd end up doing a lot of the things I've been offered the opportunity to do. When I graduated from a very great university, University of North Carolina, I didn't really have a business orientation. I thought I would, find a job. And I did for a short while, but I didn't get a lot of purpose from the job. And so at some point I met someone, Phil, literally, who said to me, you should think about pharmaceuticals. And I thought, okay, I'm not a pharmacist. Why should I think about pharmaceuticals? And to make a long story short, he said, well, you can go into a sales or a marketing role. And so in my infinite wisdom, I said, well, I want 3 things. I want a company car, I want benefits, and I want a big salary. And which are probably 3 of the most stupid reasons to look for a career change. But I did. And I ended up interviewing with only one company, a very small Midwestern company, who, for some reason, decided they wanted to give me a shot. I'm not sure what they saw, but they gave me an opportunity. And I got a company car that was, I think, the world's largest 2-door sedan. I got a benefit package that was very bare, and I got a starting salary that I'm too embarrassed to admit because it was so low. But at the time, I thought, well, I'm rich. This is going to be great. And I found out very quickly that in the world I was going into, if you didn't produce, you didn't stay long. People just vanished into the ether. And I've said this before. I think I mentioned it in one of our preliminary conversations. I probably would not have lasted long if not for a couple of things. One of them was I met a truly transformational leader. I made a great leader early on, and that, in retrospect, turned out to be an inflection point for me. And then the other thing, because I realized as mergers and acquisitions and takeovers took place, that if I didn't build my own version of a career compass, I probably wasn't going to make it because there was no GPS system. And so I built a compass, and that was the genesis of the book, The Compass Solution. But more important, I developed very early on an absolute passion for trying to understand what makes great leaders great leaders. And the probative question was always the same. What is it that a great leader does that makes us think so differently about them? Over the years, I finally began to figure that out. But to make a long story short, I ended up spending 38 years in traditional industry through 5 mergers and acquisitions, 26 restructures. And at the end, I was the only one left. And so I felt, if I could manage to negotiate this, maybe other people can too. So I wrote a book about it and eventually built my own consulting and training company to try and pass on at least a few of the things that I learned along the way.
So one kind of tangent that we didn't plan for. So here we go. Sorry in advance, Tim. But you were looking for a job, pharmaceuticals, because your mentor said pharmaceuticals because of sales and marketing, or there was some sort of connection. What I want to ask about is sales and marketing, because you in your early career, you had to produce to make a living, or to even have a job, or to be not let go. Probably like, so sales and marketing, and it was like you had to get it done. And I think, especially if someone's thinking about business eventually, all entrepreneurship, even career success in leadership roles. I think, by the way, I did not do sales and marketing myself, but this is my just perspective from studying and listening to a lot of other people. I think sales and marketing is such an early career skill set that you can develop and learn. And if you do that, it can enable your growth in, again, leadership roles, business, whatever it might be. So how critical was your sales and marketing training and understanding and learning and in your development?
Mission critical. Everybody's in sales. It's just that a lot of people don't know that they're in sales, because sales is negotiation, it's persuasion, and at its core, it's great communication. So even though I didn't really at the time, and this is 1980 when I stumbled into industry, I don't think I really had a passion then. I began to appreciate very early on, whether you know it or not, everybody has to sell, whether you're a research scientist or a person working on an assembly line. So in retrospect, it was probably as important as any of those other two things that I mentioned early on.
Yeah. And as I think back, in whether it's in business or my corporate career or whatever it might be, sales, negotiations, getting the funding for a project. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to leverage those skill sets. And, sales is persuasion. Sales is all, then people say leadership is influence, right? So right. There you go. Sales and leadership go hand in hand.
Yes.
So one thing you talked about as well is, and I don't know if there was someone a mentor, someone that influenced you to go into sales and marketing in pharmaceuticals, but also there was a transformational leader that you studied. What did you see about that person that intrigued you so much? Because I'll skip the second one for now, the compass and the GPS, because we'll come back to it. But the first and third, there was a mentor that was a transformational leader for you. And just you had a significant, I wrote down, leadership curiosity. You were just hungry to learn and understand more. And I'm guessing that maybe number 1 and 3 were connected in some way.
Yeah, I think they were. And just to be clear, the person that first suggested pharmaceuticals to me was not a mentor. It was somebody I met probably in a bar. I mean, I really don't know how I managed it, but I stumbled into it. But at some point in those formative years in industry, I did brush up against an authentic leader. I didn't report to the person, but I was so impressed by their impact on others. And you said something, Phil, that I think is powerful. Leadership ultimately is influence. And I was mesmerized by this person's effect on people. And I knew that he had taken an interest. At the time, he ran leadership development for a very small company, and I happened to be a part of that small company. And at some point, he might have recognized some semblance of potential in me. I don't know, but I was always intrigued by when this person spoke, everyone stopped, everyone listened. And I began to ask myself, well, what is it that he's doing that other people, in some cases, many highly placed individuals aren't doing? And so, as I said before, the probative question was always the same. What is it that great leaders do that make us think so differently about them? And that question evolved over time. But early on, it was probably one of the most important transition points in my career.
So first of all, I think another attribute of great leadership is that great leaders see greatness in other people. And I think this great leader saw potential in you and greatness in you, but he was also there to support you and bring that out, because he saw potential, but you maybe weren't there yet. But the other thing you said as you started the conversation, I wanted to ask you about, is you said this authentic leader. And can you define authentic? Like, why did you lead with this authentic leader? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think in a world, especially the world that we live in now, we hunger for authenticity. We hunger for people that we believe are real. And I often, when I'm asked questions, how are you going to define leadership? I go back to our 6th American president, John Adams, who said, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and be more, then you're a leader. And to your point, Phil, I think in some strange way, he saw some very small hint of potential in me. And I felt that very early on. And that's why when I say authentic leader, I often say to some of my clients, if there was no salary involved, if there were no titles involved, which people in your organization would you follow? And if the answer is no one, then you probably don't have a lot of leaders in your organization, because this person was not bound by title. They had a presence, they had an authenticity that people just gravitated to.
Yeah. I think one of the most impactful things that someone can do as they're selecting a career, as they're selecting a company, as they're selecting a small business is, I mean, there's a lot of things, like, is the business successful? Do they salary, benefits, company car? Like, there's a lot of things you can look at.
Yeah.
The most transformative, in my opinion, thing you can look for in a company that is going to progress your career, your impact that you have, is who is the leadership at that company, because they're going to be looking out for you and developing you. So if you're thinking about a career shift, a business, whatever it is, mentors, identify those people, that leader, and that's going to be hard to maybe assess in an interview process. But if you see leadership, you should go work for that company, for those people, in my opinion. The other thing that you said, you talked about lack of authenticity and people being real in our society. But the other thing that we have a gap in, and I think in our society, and you wrote a book about it, is purpose and direction. I think more than ever, people are looking for that because there's more lack of purpose and lack of direction than there ever has been before. So I think people recognize that, whether they know it or not. So tell me more about why, like you said, 3 things. And one is just your career compass, your GPS, tell me more about how do we even start? Like, where do we start with this?
Well, it's a complicated issue, and yet in some ways it's much more simple than we want to make it. I do a lot of work, Phil, on the subject of employee disengagement, which is really what you're speaking to. A lot of employees in this country and around the world are not really engaged at work. And in this country, about 1 in 3 are pretty engaged, which means 2 out of 3 workers, and think about how many millions of people work for a living, really just show up. If you believe that purpose is important, and I do, Dan Pink wrote a book about this a few years ago. He said, autonomy, mastery, and purpose are what drives most of us. For a lot of employees, there is no purpose. They simply collect a paycheck and they go home. And if you're a millennial and a Gen Z, this is really potentially a toxic environment. So when I work with clients, whether at the C-suite level or first-line leaders, I suggest to them that one of your most important missions is to try and make sure that the people that work with you have a sense of purpose. And for the most part, that comes down to 3 things. It's an integration of what they're passionate about, what their skills are, and what the opportunities are. So if you were to draw a Venn diagram with 3 circles, it's the intersection of passion, skills, and opportunity. Great leaders understand what their employees are most passionate about, and they hook into those things. I've said this before. Early in my career, someone said to me, "Hey, Tim, in so many words, you're passionate about 3 things." And I was, and I didn't really realize it at the time. You're passionate about learning. You seem to be passionate about this subject of communication. And I first started college, to be quite frank, as a journalism major. So yeah, I had that passion. But the third thing you're passionate about is leadership. So if you're really passionate about learning, communication, and leadership, I want to make sure that as we work together, you tap into those passions. And for me, that was like a lifeline, because I probably would have been lost. This was not, by the way, the same mentor that I mentioned before. But when he helped me understand, those are the 3 things that really drive me, suddenly it became a lot easier to go to work every day, because I could tap into those things in the everyday world, even when I was in a traditional sales role.
So first of all, you keep mentioning different mentors. So right. I just want to highlight the fact of the importance of identifying mentors. By the way, I think as business leaders, business executives, senior leaders, we start to lose that. People start to lose like the opportunity for mentors, and they feel like a lone wolf sometimes. I just think it's so important to continue to identify people.
Yes.
The topic of helping employees find purpose. I want to maybe ask questions, because I've thought about this and I don't know if I have it all figured out. But so we have a company or an organization, whether if we're a leader in a company that, big corporation to a small business, and the company has its purpose and mission statement. Mm-hmm. But maybe, I think the gap is their team members, employees aren't connected to that. Maybe it's not talked about enough, or they're just not a connection. So as leaders, are we trying to create the connection to the company's mission statement? Or are we trying to understand the individual, how their passion, skills, and opportunities intersect the Venn diagram that you talked about? And then, are we trying to understand that for the individual? How do we connect these two things?
Yeah, first of all, that is a fantastic question, because the default for a lot of companies is to say, here's our mission, here's the shining city on the hill, you can be a part of it. But if it doesn't in some way align with what the individual holds of import, it doesn't make any difference. So to answer your question, it is an integration of the two. And the great leaders, I think, are able to say, yeah, this is what we want to accomplish as a company, but let's talk about what you want to accomplish. Let's talk about what is most important to you. I have a little diagram that I use that I don't think you and I talked about in our preliminary conversation, but I learned something years ago. There are universal questions that we all ask when we look at a leader, whether he or she is first line or senior leader. And you hit it dead on when you said, if you can select your leader when you're looking at a company, start there. I always say to clients, look at the future of the company, look at the culture, look at the work, look at the team. But the thing you better look at most is the leadership, because that's going to dictate your happiness or lack thereof. I say all that in order to say this. When I have studied great leaders, really great leaders, I've learned that they answer in some way by their actions, not their words, 5 basic questions. And those 5 questions are these. Number 1, they look at you and they say, are you credible? Because if I don't see some combination of competency and authenticity, I don't care. You can look good, you can sound good, it doesn't make any difference. But that's the first question. The second question is, can you make me better? That's Friedrich Nietzsche. If you can't improve my station in life, I'm not going to be inclined to follow you. Those 2 questions are easy. The questions 3, 4, and 5 begin to address what you're talking about. Question 3 is, do you have a dream that I can believe in? Now, that's not necessarily a corporate mission statement. Do you have a dream that I can believe and that aligns with my dreams?
That's the connection point, right?
This is where, yeah, that's yep. It exactly. Now, the great leaders, and I've studied great leaders and I've studied mediocre leaders, also answer 2 more questions that is the distinguishing line of demarcation between average and great. The great leaders also answer these questions. Do you care about me? And can I trust you? And when you find people that answer questions 3, 4, and 5, you're going to find the great leaders in your organization. And unfortunately, oftentimes managers or supervisors can answer questions 1 and 2, but it takes great leaders to answer questions 3, 4, and 5.
So question 3 is what I want to ask another follow-up, because I think this is so important, because I think business leaders, business owners are terrified of asking this question. I think they're afraid to know the answer. And I think what's important here is that people they're working for a reason. And what I don't want that reason to be is just the paycheck. Right. But I think because if it becomes just a paycheck, we go back to the earlier topic of we have disengaged employees, right? Because it's just I can get a paycheck in other places, I can do other things. The paycheck, it's just about money, and we can't have that. Maybe just 1 and 2. Or that's the level of leadership we're getting to in your questions. But I think owners, business leaders are afraid to. They might have a purpose statement, but they're afraid to ask people what their purpose is for their work, because they're afraid there's not what if there's not a connection? Mm-hmm. What if they don't connect? What if I ask an employee, here's my business mission statement. Right. What is your purpose for your career? Mm-hmm. And I think they're afraid of what the answer might be. Why should I get over that fear?
Yeah. Well, here's the simple answer. What happens if you don't ask the question? There's your answer. You have silent disengagement from people that have silently left their jobs. So and I encounter this in the corporate world, people say, well, yeah, I don't know if I really want to ask that, Tim. Okay, then you probably need to take a look in the mirror and ask yourself, what happens if you don't ask it? Are people going to suddenly go, well, since he or she hasn't asked it, I guess I'll just be happy? It doesn't work that way. Phil, we have 75% of the workforce in this country today are either millennials or Generation Z. That is the most disengaged work piece of our entire country right now. Those two segments are the most disengaged. And they are the ones, to your earlier point, that are saying, give me purpose, give me a reason for showing up. And that speaks to a lot of things that extend beyond the job, work-life harmony, making sure that my work has meaning. If I don't have that, I'm going to walk on you. And the reality is it's the employers that are afraid to ask those questions that are probably going to have the greatest levels of attrition.
And I think that the driver of the fear is the awkwardness of the conversation more than it is the outcome, because I think you said it so well. There's silent disengagement and we're afraid of vocal disengagement. But if we have vocal disengagement, we understand the disengagement. Guess what? Now we know what the disengagement is. We have an opportunity to fix it. If we can't fix it, then we have to go our separate ways, in my opinion, and that's better than silent disengagement. So I think it's the fear of the awkwardness of the conversation, and being, as we talked about earlier, an authentic and real leader that oftentimes prevents the conversation. So I think that's fantastic. So the Compass Alliance, the Compass solution, what you're all about is helping bring this clarity to an organization, but then once we kind of have, okay, let's say we have the founder, the team leader, the employees, we have this Venn diagram, we have clarity, we can connect it, right? We've done those things. The other thing, whether this is critical or not, but you talk about a lot, is now we have to build a foundation which starts with self-awareness, is what you say. But is that after we get clarity? Is it then let's build self-awareness, or am I missing anything?
Well, I don't think most of us are born with self-awareness. I certainly wasn't. I say to some of the people I work with, we all carry two tools our entire life. One is a mirror and one's a magnifying glass. With a magnifying glass, we look at the world around us. With the mirror, we should be looking at ourselves. Most of us have a very underdeveloped mirror. I certainly had one and still have one where I either have flaws or blind spots. I said before that I went to work in industry because I wanted a company car, benefits, and a salary. Honestly, three extrinsic factors that ultimately made no difference a year down the road. So I think from day one, you want to help people in their self-awareness journey. But the Compass, the book I wrote, The Compass Solution, the North Star, the lodestar is the same for all of us, and that is personal accountability. If it is to be, it's going to have to be up to me. And I've worked with some great leaders, had some great coaches, but after about the fourth or fifth merger, I began to realize, hey, I better make certain that managing self is my number one priority. And that's what I encourage the people that I work with to do. I work as a mentor and as a coach, but I generally say to them, look, I'm not going to travel with you 24/7 for the rest of your life. The only person that's going to travel with you is the person that you look at in the mirror every day. So personal accountability, leading self is, in my opinion, maybe the most important factor of all.
How do we, so outside of doing what we like, how do we strategize for this? How do we build goals around developing our personal accountability or our self-awareness? Like, how do I even start with that? So we're listening to it, right? We're listening to the Purpose Matrix. We're listening to the show. We're listening to podcasts. We're learning and growing. But how do we do this?
Yeah. Well, those 5 questions I've used that I shared earlier for probably 3 decades. Those are not just questions that we ask of leaders. They're the same questions that people every day are asking of us. They look at Tim or they look at Phil and they ask, are you credible? Can you make me better? Do you have a dream I can believe in? So I would tell you, if you take those same questions and ask yourself, how are people answering those about me? And if you really want to test it, go to some of those peers that you work with and say, you know what, I'm trying to work on my own insight, my own accountability. I'm trying to make sure that I'm making a difference in this organization, this company, this department. Give me some feedback. What do you think? It's amazing the power of asking questions when it comes to other people. It's a stunning revelation for most of us. So that's a pretty good starting point. And then the other thing that I would say, I have a very simple philosophy that I try to live up to, and I fail probably every day. I say to people, look, if you want to take 5 things that will make an influence on other people, here are 5 things you can do today. Number 1, you can do your best. Number 2, you can help somebody. Number 3, you can look for the good. Number 4, you can do what's right. And number 5, you can treat other people the way they deserve to be treated. Those are 5 ridiculously simple things, but most of us fail to do them. That's a good starting point, at least.
Yeah. What I talk about it like there's a kind of an excellence equation, which is we get so caught up in what happens to us or the results we get, but really excellence is about how we live is who we are. And if all those things are, how are you living your life? Are you doing your best? Are you helping others, right? Treating others well? I was trying to keep up there, Tim, but the point is, how are you living? And those things are really 5 simple things that you can do. I also want to talk about the 360 feedback. So we're going into our kind of annual planning sessions here, and we're going to do a kind of a in-person with our leadership team 360 feedback where, hey, what is one thing that is, this person is bringing to the table that is really accelerating the success of our business, but also what is one thing that is maybe this person is doing to hold it back. And I just, a lot of bigger companies might have these platforms, organizations, consultants. I'm sure you do it where there's 360 feedback, but for smaller business or smaller teams, if you don't have that, how can we, I guess maybe I should ask that. So our business or someone that's leading a team of 5 or 6 people in a company, whatever that is, how can we facilitate this? What's your recommendation on facilitating this 360 peer feedback session?
The toughest part about 360, and I've been a part of 360s for 30 or 40 years, is twofold. One, the leader's insistence on authenticity and honesty in the response. And number 2, what happens after the 360 is completed. I've worked with companies who do a 360 and then nothing happens, which is basically a smack in the face of the participants. I think that when you use 360 feedback well, it's a challenge to the leader to actually listen and to be vulnerable enough to accept the 360 for themselves. And then everyone else looks and says, wow, did you see that? Look how Phil took all that feedback, both positive and negative, and asked, what can I do to make this better? When the leader does it, when the leader demonstrates vulnerability, the 360 works incredibly well. I would tell you, again, without looking at what your 360 is designed to do, the reason we have 360s is that it's sometimes difficult in the workplace to have the candor to have these conversations every day. 360 is a prop. It's a vehicle that allows you to do it. In the best organizations I've ever worked with, they didn't need a 360. They didn't need it. They said, hey, Tim, just for what it's worth, you asked for me to be candid and transparent. I got to tell you, when you have these Friday afternoon sessions at 4:00, it's just ticking me off. It's not making us better. Could we maybe look at stopping doing that? So I like 360s, but I would also tell you the leader's role and the transparency around it is probably the most important factor.
Yeah, and I think if there's just there's a culture of transparency. Generally, that's how you get hey, this happened yesterday. I want to give you feedback on that, and you give it directly.
Yeah.
And by the way, if the leader starts to do that, then your team members will start to do that to each other without you being there. That's the more powerful thing, because I don't want a team member to come to me with an issue with team member B.
Yeah.
I'd rather team member A go to team member B and say, hey, we had this discussion yesterday. I didn't really appreciate this or that. I just wanted you to be aware of it. Like, that's way more powerful, because then my role as a leader is I'm fostering that transparency amongst the group, but I have to do that myself, including give feedback and take feedback to cultivate that kind of culture within the organization.
That's beautifully said. I will tell you, and I think I may have mentioned this before, but when when I came up with my quote unquote probative question about that first mentor, the person that I didn't even report to at the time, but ran our leadership development, I decided I would codify leadership. I will come up with the behaviors, the traits of this individual, and I'll copy them, which again speaks to how naive I was, but I would study them. I figured, well, it's got to be executive presence, or maybe it's communication skills, or maybe it's marketing acumen. And I tried to codify those, but I found it frustrating because I couldn't really distinguish what he was doing versus other senior leaders until the day came, and I'm using a little bit of editorial license on this, but I'll share it. Crowded auditorium, 500, maybe 1,000 people in the room, long list of speakers. Second day, 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they bring up the leader, the person that I so respected. And I knew other people in that room respected him too. Now, back then, this is pre-cell phone. So you have a lot of background noise. There were people that literally brought newspapers to try and get through the marathon. And we've all been there. You know, meetings where after about the third presentation, you've lost the will to live. Just get me through it. And we were there on this second or third day, and then they bring up this guy, and there's applause. And until then, there had been this hum of background conversation. I kid you not, people brought paperback books well back and they would try to read the paperback. They were that bored. And then this guy came up, and I noticed the entire room changed. The atmosphere in the room literally changed. And I found myself back there, and I was listening, obviously, because I respected this guy's name's Dave so very much. But I looked, and I noticed the conversations, they all ended. The paperback books closed, the newspapers dropped to the floor. And I thought to myself, what is happening here? Because this wasn't the senior-most person in the organization, but he was the most respected. And in the course of the next 30 minutes, I had two insights. Insight number one, which speaks exactly what you just said. Insight number one is it's not what great leaders do that make us think so differently about them. It's what they do that make us think so differently about ourselves. And that was powerful. That's what leaders do. And then the other thing I learned, and it informs a big part of my practice now, is that if you really want to understand and study great leaders, spend a lot more time studying their followers. Because if a leader doesn't have followers, he or she is not a leader. And so I spend a great deal of time understanding what followers need so that I can better understand what great leaders do.
Yeah, you did tell me that story, and I loved it as much the second time as the first. And I think, I think there's just a lot about that leader. If you go back to even caring about others, you talked about that earlier, and then authenticity, like and just likely seeing so much in a lot of people in that room, right? Like, you just authentic and real. Like I can picture this leader already. One thing I thought maybe you're going to hit on, and I want to ask is, you said when you were younger, you were studying a leader and you were saying, I want to be like that person. But we have there's fundamentals of leadership and skills of leadership, but there's also adapting to our leadership style, which could be a very quiet, calm, collected, don't say much at all, lead by example, to maybe more of a mentor, teacher, communicates more. Like there's a million different directions we could go with this. So how do we figure out our leadership style?
That's one of the better questions I've ever been asked in a podcast, because early on, I assumed that the only way I could ever be a leader was to mimic this person's style. And I found out you can't. Your own personality is going to weigh heavily in how you approach leadership. So the very nature of authenticity means you have to be yourself. People have asked me, so describe for me the perfect profile of a leader. And I've worked with great leaders that are so over the top. I mean, charismatic, like, let me listen to me. And it's that kind of, and then I've worked with leaders that are so laid back that you ask yourself, okay, is he or she ever going to speak? I think for everyone, it's your own personal journey. You can't assume to be someone else and ever be perceived as an authentic leader. It's just not going to happen. And so what I try to do is I ask myself, what can I do to be my best self, my authentic self, and then ask whether or not by those actions, am I answering those basic questions. Are you credible? Can you make me better? And if I can use my own intrinsic gifts to do that, I have a good chance of being perceived as a leader. Back in 2008, the Gallup Group came out with a study. It was a 2-year study looking at followers around the world. They said there are 4 universal needs that we all have. We have a need for stability. We have a need for hope. We have a need for compassion, and we have a need for trust. And I love those because they align perfectly with what I call the 5 asks. But I think today there's a 5th, and that's the need for affirmation. I think if you look at stability, affirmation, hope, compassion, and trust, whatever your personality or your communication style, if you're addressing those needs, you're probably going to be well regarded as a leader. If you're not, you probably aren't going to be.
And I think this whole, first of all, again, you are a wizard on leadership, and you can tell you've been very curious, as you said, from the onset for a long, long time. And there's a compound effect of your leadership style. And then obviously, I think too, when you're teaching and coaching leadership, you become a better leader through that process as well. But I think just to close out the discussion on your own leadership style for you that are listening is, the key is build upon the foundation of who you are, your leadership style. Don't try to mimic or match other people. That's not authentic. And people are going to see that you're not being authentically who you are. If you're not being your best leader, you have to be the best leader based on your skills, your talents, your passions, who you are. So learn from others, but there's a difference between learning from others and copying others. Learn from others, seeing what's great, and apply it to what the foundation of who you are is, I think, is how you approach it. So we kind of have clarity of what the direction we want to go. The compass is set, right, for a career at a high level, for whether that's as a leader, as an employee, whatever it might be. We've built this foundation of self-awareness. We're starting to figure out what our leadership might be, our leadership style might be. But how do we build a roadmap then for a career, a profession, or business, whatever it might be? Talk me more about this and how we avoid drifting away from that as well.
Yeah, well, if we go back to those 3 circles, and I use those a lot, this intersection of passion and skills and opportunity. Now, think about that for a second. If we put those 3 circles up and Venn diagrammed it, you're going to be at your best when it's the intersection of all 3, passion, skills, and opportunity. Most of us, when we go into the business world, and I put myself at the top of this list, I took a job because there was an opportunity. I wasn't even prepared to ask myself whether or not the skills I had would match the opportunity. So I started with opportunity, then looked at skills, and eventually began to ask myself, do I even like doing this? So that's a bass-backwards way to approach it. In a perfect world, begin with identifying what you're most passionate about. Ask yourself whether or not you have the skills to do it, and then whether or not you have opportunities that will allow you to leverage those skills. Every role we take in any industry, we should be trying to move closer to the Venn diagram, the center of those 3 circles. You may take multiple jobs where you're beginning to drift. And sometimes it's when we're so focused on the opportunity ball that we haven't really assessed our skills or our passions. So what I try to say to clients is, look, you're going to make moves in your life. Just try to generally move yourself more to the center. And when you do, I'm going to tell you, you'll get to the point like I reached where you're not really working anymore. You're doing, I can't believe people pay me to talk about that which I've loved for years. And you said it well. I'm a student of leadership. I'm not a leadership expert, but I continue to study it. And I will probably study it to the day I die because it absolutely fascinates me. That's my simple answer.
Yeah. I love the passion, skills, opportunity. There's different Venn diagrams, but I love it. I think, first of all, every one of them has these 3. Maybe there's different words for them sometimes, but they all have it. And what I like, though, and I haven't heard before, is start with passion, skill, because you'll find the opportunity. It might be opportunity, it might be impact, it might be income or financial means, whatever you want to call it. For me, it's like needs of others, what the world needs. I've heard all of that for opportunity. And you can find that vehicle. But I think honing in on what you're passionate about and what your skills are and really dialing it in there and learning where to apply it will then become the easy part. But I think if you're searching just, and if you reverse it like you did, I think that's dangerous, right? If you're just looking for opportunity, just looking for money, but you're not really aligned with your passion, skills, and what you enjoy doing, you're not going to feel very fulfilled, I don't think. So I really like the order, the sequencing of that you added as well.
Well, you said it well. I wrote the book about 8 or 9 years ago, The Compass Solution. And the reason I wrote it, Phil, is that I was coming to an end of, in my case, a 38-year traditional career. And I looked around and I talked to contemporaries, and I was stunned at the number of people that had spent probably 90, maybe 100,000 hours of their lives. And you ask, so, when you look back, what are you most proud of? And they said, well, I paid for a mortgage. I put 2 kids through college. We're okay. And I thought, that's it? That's when you look back at 90 to 100,000 hours of your life, and it's just, I survived it. And so what I generally try to say to people, look, this should be a great adventure where you're becoming everything that you possibly could be. And that's why I'm so passionate about what we're talking about now. And I think in many cases, the difference is whether or not you're prepared to lead through your career or simply be the victim of your career.
Yeah. And by the way, I can feel the passion. I love this conversation. I think I didn't warn you, but we're going to talk for 3 hours today, Tim, because this is so good. We're preparing for a business owner lunch meeting tomorrow. And one of the questions is, why do you own a business? Why do you do what you do? But one of the caveats is you cannot reference money, income, making a living. You can't reference any of that. Like, why are you in business? Why are you doing what you're doing? And I think for anyone listening, why are you doing what you're doing? And can you answer the question without saying, because it's covering my expenses, it's covering my mortgage, as Tim said? Don't answer it that way. Why are you doing what you're doing? And maybe the company you're not aligned with, but at the same time, most of the opportunities and like the needs of others, whatever you want to call that, if there's people involved in your business, in your organization, which there are opportunities to impact people. So I think that opportunity likely exists where you're at today, especially if you have a strong leadership team. The product doesn't, none of that stuff really matters. So I think you can find this. Maybe there's some soul searching and discussions you need to have, but I think it's so important. I like the frame of reference of just, again, to close that out, doing the passion skills part of this first before the opportunity or money or even bringing that into the conversation.
Yeah. And by the way, I love that question. Why do you do what you do? And by the way, you can't talk about money or compensate. I'm going to probably plagiarize that because it's true in any company. If there was no title or no stock options or no salary, why are you doing this? And if you have to fall back to extrinsic factors versus intrinsic ones, you may not be in an area where you're tapping into your passion piece.
And I think if your team, again, it could be a fear of asking that question, but that's what, if you're afraid to ask it, well, then guess what? You have quiet disengagement. Right. So create the uncomfortable conversations and figure it out.
That's right.
Talk to me about, I think society, you talk about drift, right? Tell me more about what you mean by that.
Well, I use a lot of data from the Gallup Group. I'm a big fan, and they are arguably the most well-researched on this phenomenon called global disengagement. And it's a pandemic. Before there was COVID, we saw the devastating effect of people that are just at the far extreme. They're burned out, and something less than that. In most cases, they're simply collecting a paycheck. It costs our global economy over $8 trillion a year. In this country, it costs an astonishing amount. And in every company of size, you can go in and assume that probably somewhere between a quarter and a third of your workers are actually engaged, and everyone else is simply coexisting. My son and I have a podcast called In Search of a Leader. And one of our first podcasts was called The Zombie Apocalypse. And that was a little bit of a harsh title, but in my opinion, if you're simply pulling yourself up on Monday morning and making yourself go to work and going, okay, I can get through. I can get through this. You're a zombie. And in a lot of cases, you have to make some decisions to either get yourself out of it or resign yourself to being one of the living undead. So I think a lot of organizations are beginning to look at this in a different way. Unfortunately, they don't look at it until it's affecting the bottom line. And I can tell you, for any company of size, I have never worked with a company that doesn't have a certain degree of employee disengagement. And it goes back to a couple of things. And by the way, the most important factor, if you're in close proximity to a great leader, your chances of being engaged increases 2 to 3-fold. Now, that's pretty simple. If you're in close proximity to a great leader, you're going to be engaged. Now, that's not always the case, but that's a big, big factor.
I love the zombie apocalypse. And I saw that, but I didn't know it makes so much sense. And by the way, in my later years, I say that like that makes me silly. But in the corporate world, when I was there, I was working with Gallup directly, and we were doing employee engagement. And look, in any company of size, of scale, as you said, there is going to be disengagement. The better the leaders, the better the leadership, the better the mission, the better the purpose, the less disengagement. But if you're leading a team of any size, or even a small team, I think just get comfortable having these uncomfortable conversations and bringing these things to surface. And don't let the disengagement be silent. Right. If there's anything to commit to out of this discussion and what you're listening today and what Tim is teaching us is the starting point is know where you stand. Don't let it be silent. If it's loud disengagement then you got to address that. But you got to at least where you stand, and then start going down the path of the Venn diagram and the other steps that Tim talked about today.
Well, I love your terminology. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think great leaders are willing and able to step into that dark zone and ask the questions that need to be asked, but all too often aren't asked. And that's, I think that's what great leaders do. I think you and I have talked about this, but in my client work, I've worked very, very hard to make things ridiculously simple, probably because I'm kind of a simple guy. But when I work with companies and I look at leadership development, and I consult on building a leadership development program, what is it that great leaders do? How can we make sure that there is a leadership persona? More often than not, every great leader I've worked with, Phil, can do 3 things. They can do 3 things. And people hear that and go, wait a minute, it's a lot more complicated. Well, it is. But at its core, every great leader I've ever worked with can first attract and recruit exceptional talent. Even if you're the CEO, if you're not bringing great talent into your organization, you will eventually fail. So first, they can attract and recruit. The second thing they can do is they can develop and retain the talent, which is where coaching and training and mentoring and making sure that those people that you're bringing in are getting better. And then the third thing they can do is they can build the individual pieces into a whole that exceeds the sum of its parts. So attract and recruit, develop and retain, build the whole. Great leaders, especially in that third category, are different. They're just different from everybody else. They look at all those pieces and go, all right, how do we make this something truly special? And that's where culture and strategy kind of intersect.
I like that. I thought when you said 3 things and you said attract, I thought you were going to say attract 1, develop 2, retain 3. But attract, develop, and retain. But number 3, I don't hear, or I haven't heard in the context of the first 2. And I love it because yes, okay, 1 and 2 are about you can build strong individual contributors that can work independently of each other. But as you're developing them, are you also developing their interpersonal skills, their leadership skills, their communication skills? And I mean, there's a lot to number 3. How can you build a team as a whole, get them to be connected? There's a lot of strategy. That's not an easy thing to do, but that's also why it really differentiates a great leader from a good leader. A good leader can maybe do 1 and 2, but a great leader can do 1, 2, and 3. So I like that. Tim, this is, we could go on for a while here, and we'll probably end up, here's what happens. We'll finish the recording. I'll ask a couple of final questions, and Tim and I will talk for another hour or so. So maybe we should just keep going, but I appreciate it so much, Tim. I'm going to have 2 closing questions here. One, how do you for a career, for profession, how do you define success?
Very differently than how it would have 4 decades ago. I think the measure of your life comes down to the family that loved you, the colleagues that believed in you, and the people that you helped along the way. Success is the accumulation of all the baubles that we want to look for. Significance is making a difference in the lives of others. And that's, I think, maybe the most important legacy that any leader can leave behind.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I love it. I love it. If you step back and reflect, think about your career, more importantly, I mean, all the impact you had as a leader in your career, the lives you touched, right? The people you helped along the way. But if you step back and reflect, and then from a leadership, the book you wrote, the Compass Alliance, everything that you're doing, step back and reflect. How does what you do, how does it make you feel?
Phil, I said it before. If someone would have said to me back in 1980, someday you'll get a chance to talk to bright people like Phil Moeller, interact with clients and people of every different level, and talk about something that you truly believe in and that you're passionate about, and you'll do it because you want to do it, not because you have to do it, I would have said, I'll sign up for that. And so I've been blessed. I know I've been blessed. I've been blessed because a few people along the way took the time to help me. And whenever I talk in podcasts like this, I try to always say in so many words, I'm representing a lot of people that aren't here that have had a critical impact on my career. And as best I can, I want to represent them reasonably well. And again, say thank you for what they did.
I can feel a lot of gratitude and gratefulness there, Tim. And I have to say that I'm very grateful for this discussion. We're blessed to have you on this. Our listeners are blessed to have you talk to them and just have an impact on them. This is going to have a ripple effect where they're going to use these lessons, figure out their authentic leadership style, help you as a listener identify what your purpose is, what your team's purpose is. If you can do that, you're going to accelerate your team's significance in so many different ways. So Tim, this has been very, very impactful. We might go on for an hour here. I appreciate it so much. Tim, how can people find out specifically more about you, what you're doing, get the book? Tell us more about that.
Well, the company is called the Compass Alliance. And if you go to thecompassalliance.com, you'll see my website. The book is called The Compass Solution, subtitle, A Guide to Winning Your Career. It's available, I guess, anywhere they sell books. Amazon's probably the easiest way. But I would also say, in terms of just the here and now, my son and I, David, is a business entrepreneur, and we've posted only 5 episodes of a leadership series that we call In Search of a Leader. So if you go to insearchofaleader.com, you'll be able to see some of the things that we both believe in, that I certainly believe in, and it'll give you a flavor for a dialogue very similar, Phil, to the one that you and I have had. With David, who, along with my other son, 2 very bright, far more qualified than their old man to be in business. David said, in so many words, Dad, we've had these conversations over the years. Let's videotape them. And so that's what we tried to do. That's a pretty good starting point. And then the last piece, if people want to reach me, tim.cole@thecompassalliance.com, reach out. You can get my telephone number. You can do whatever you want. I do this because I love it and I'm passionate about it. That's probably a pretty good starting point right there.
Amazing. And honestly, so first of all, we will all those locations all in the show notes. So look down below or find the show notes, whether you're on YouTube, Apple, wherever it is, Spotify. Check out In Search of a Leader. How cool is it? You get to not just teach leadership, you get to have these conversations with your son.
It's ridiculous.
Like if I think about that,
it's amazing.
Family.
Yeah.
I mean, how just tell me more about that.
Well, I said earlier, my wife and I were blessed with 2 amazing sons, and they're both super intelligent, super successful, and I can take a little bit of pride in the fact that my wife deserves more of the credit at who they are, and they're great family men as well, and they're great people. They're people of both faith and also of conviction in terms of how they work with others. And to answer your question, it's ridiculously fun. I can't believe that I could. The only sad part, Phil, is I look at them and go, it was just yesterday that they were tiny, and now I look at them and they're adults. You and I were talking about a hiking trip that I listened to your podcast on. Now I live not just through my sons, but we have 4 grandkids, and the oldest is Cooper. We have Cooper, Carly, Amelia, and Scarlett. Cooper's 8 years old, and I look at Cooper and go, that was your dad just yesterday. It goes so quickly.
Yeah. Well, embrace, but now you get grandkids and you get to spoil them and then run away too. But honestly, great. Tim, and by the way, a good reminder for me and for our kids too, to embrace this time. Cause I was actually, as we're doing some goal planning, thinking about, okay, how do we want to raise our kids and what does that look like when they become adults? And honestly, what you talked about, the ability to have the conversations like that, but slow down. Let's not rush to that. Let's just enjoy those kids at the age they're at too. So not just a ton of business wisdom and leadership wisdom here, Tim, but some personal wisdom. I love that you referenced faith and growing kids of faith too, a big part of what we're trying to do. So I appreciate it so much. Tim, thanks for coming on for the Purpose Matrix. Signing off.
Phil, thank you.